Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, for staying with us for the final session of today's symposium. This is entitled, All Who Wander Are Not Lost, 40 Years of Sunstone Manna in the Correlated Wilderness. So you're in for a treat. There's a lot of history that you're going to learn about tonight. We've got some great panelists that have agreed to join us, and we're very, very excited that so many of you decided to stay. Now we're going to go ahead and get underway. We've asked Bill McGee, who's our newly elected chair of the board of directors for the Sunstone Foundation, to offer that for us.
Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to gather together. We're grateful for this beautiful day, for faith, for our curiosity, for the desire to understand and seek answers, things that have been the foundation of this organization for 40 years. We're grateful for those who have served in this endeavor to give everyone a voice and to create a forum of discussion so that we can come to better understand thee and to understand this culture and our place in it. We invite thy Spirit here to be with us during this meeting, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I'm very excited. This is actually my first symposium. I have not been involved with Sunstone up until about 4 months ago. And so I'm excited to be with you. It's been a great learning process. And I want to thank you all for the hand of friendship and fellowship that you've extended to me. So many people have just come up and introduced themselves that have been coming to this symposium forever. And I just really appreciate that. You've made me feel welcome. You've made me feel at home. And as we look towards the future, we're very, very excited for the future of Sunstone. So as we revisit the past here, we're focused also on the future. We've got great things in store, the expansion of programs, the growth of opportunities, and the inclusion of folks throughout the entire spectrum. So thanks for welcoming me. Thanks for being here. We're going to go ahead and let me introduce our speakers first. Stephen Carter is to my immediate left. Stephen holds an MFA in fiction and a PhD in narrative studies. Since 2008, Stephen has been the editor of Sunstone magazine. He became a documentary filmmaker while researching his dissertation in somewhere in Alaska. That sounds a little bit like Shishmaref. And he is also an author, and probably his greatest claim to fame is the fact that he's a stay-at-home dad. But knowing Stephen and the amount of work that he does, I'm guessing his kids get much attention. John Hatch is right there. And John is the acquisitions editor for Signature Books, the editor of Danish Apostle. The diary is Anton H. Lund. He's currently finishing an article examining early LDS negotiation of mainstream movies, providing for the leisure time needs of the church, the LDS embrace and exhibition of cinema from 1890 to 1933. Next, we have with us Susan Staker. Susan currently lives in Whidbey Island in Washington State, where she reads, writes, gardens, and walks her dog. In previous lives, she's worked as an editorial director at Adobe Systems and as the editor for Sunstone and Signature Books. She also is a PhD student in narrative theory and 19th century, 20th century British literature right here at the University of Utah. She brings a background in Mormon studies, 19th century literature, and narrative theory to her study of Joseph Smith. Next up is Dan Witherspoon. I think most of you know Dan. He is really good. We were a little short on water last night, so he went and got some out of the trunk of his car. And I did the same thing tonight. So Dan, thanks for the water. And he was the editor of Sunstone from 2001 to 2008, and also hosts the Mormon Matters podcast. And there's also a gentleman that's sitting all the way down on the end who's not on my list. He's on the back. It's Alan Roberts.
Not at the end then. Second.
Okay, who's Alan Roberts? Oh.
The well-dressed one.
So I can only get away with this because I'm new, because I'm guessing all of you know who Alan Roberts is. He's the president of the Cooper Roberts Simonson? See, I would have known that if I was here last year. Architects, headquartered right here in Salt Lake. He's the former co-publisher, editor of Sunstone Magazine and the journal, Dialogue, and served on the editorial boards of Signature Books and the Journal of Mormon History. He's written 8 books and a score of articles on Mormon history, architecture, and social issues. For 27 months in 1986 to 1988, Alan worked with Linda Sillitoe, thank you, in co-producing Salamander, the story of the Mormon forgery murders, published by Signature Books. It was the #1 bestseller in the Intermountain States for a year and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 1988, the year of its first edition. He's gone through several editions, and the last being published about a year ago. He and Linda also wrote articles on the Hoffman story for local magazines and traveled extensively on speaking tours before and after Salamander was published. Although their later contacts were few, they remained friends during the next 22 years up through Linda's recent passing. And last and certainly not least, we have Gary Shepard. He is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Oakland University in Michigan. Gary received his undergraduate degree in sociology from the University of Utah and went on to earn his PhD from Michigan State University. He is co-author with his brother Gordon of the books Building Faith in Heaven, Patriarchal Blessings in the Early Development of Mormonism, Mormon Passage, a Missionary Chronicle, and A Kingdom Transformed, Themes in the Development of Mormonism. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for staying, but I think you're going to be very, very glad you did as we go through this session. And I'd now like to turn our time over to Mary Ellen, who will be our moderator for the night.
I will describe how this session will unfold, but first, I would like to ask everybody here a few questions. Please stand if the following apply to you. You have been involved in some way with Sunstone Magazine on the editorial side as a contributor. Your writing has been published. You've edited a magazine. Anybody? If that applies, please stand. All right. If you have been a participant, no, so you can stay standing. What I'm trying to do is get everybody in the room on their feet. If you have been involved with the Sunstone Symposium, either as a presenter, session chair, volunteer, respondent, or attendee, that should get everybody, right? Great. For those of you who have donated time, toil, blood, sweat, tears, or legal tender, please stand. And if you've served in any kind of leadership position on the board, past or present, or have guided what happens at Sunstone in some way, letters to the editor, hoorays, boos, constructive criticism, I think we pretty much got everybody. So what I wanted to do is illustrate the community aspect of this organization. You can all be seated. So thank you for indulging me on that. What we will start with tonight is Stephen Carter will lead us on a romp through the Sunstone archives with photos and Sunstone material culture. And then we will hear from our other panelists this evening, roughly in the order that they're listed on the program, and they will take a few minutes to talk about their respective eras of involvement with Sunstone. And then Gary Shepard is going to wrap up by talking about the role of an independent organization and what that independent voice contributes to the larger Mormon culture and the institution, the parent institution of the church. So we'll hear a little bit more about that at the end to wrap things up. And we're hoping to have some Q&A with folks that are here, and I will turn the time over to Stephen.
First, I need to say thank you to all the historians and such that have unwittingly added to this and to this history. One of them is Alan Roberts, who helped me locate all of these buildings. One of them is David Carter, who helped me photograph them. And another one is Lavinia Fielding Anderson, whom I stole from without any conscience. The other is Gary James Bergera, whom I also stole from without any conscience. Who else have I got here? I've stolen from a lot of people for this. So this was where the first, right, Alan? The first office. Alan gave the magazine its first office in 1976, which was when I was 1 year old. He and Wally Cooper had started what became Cooper Roberts Architects with a specialty in historic preservation. But by 1978, he had moved to the Bud Bailey building, which is what you're seeing, which is an old laundry building on 300 North in Salt Lake City, which strangely enough is pretty much kitty corner to where we are right now. While they were there, Peggy Fletcher worked part-time as a receptionist for them and did Sunstone part-time. So Sunstone business was conducted on the fly in the firm's reception area. But of course, as anyone who has run Sunstone knows, Sunstone is in no way a part-time job. So when Cooper Roberts remodeled the back room, Peggy made it her Sunstone office. I assume she just went in and took it over. And first we had Frances Ann Smith and then Susan Staker, whom you'll hear from soon. They took over as receptionists. And then essentially what it was a little room right beneath the bathroom, which had apparently a thunderous toilet that they eventually grew immune to. So it was actually in the reception area, right behind those doors, where the Salt Lake Sunstone Symposium was first rambled about inside of people's heads. They were all sitting in directors' chairs, thinking, and lo, 35 years later, here we are. So that was the first building, the Bailey building, right up there by the tracks. And then eventually Sunstone grew out of that building and moved to the Hotel Newhouse, which is clear down here where a parking lot is now. And it used to be a swanky hotel in Salt Lake, but by then it was 73 years old and it was falling apart. And it had a lot of room that was very cheap and the world's slowest elevator. There were snails that were beating it up. And so Susan likes to tell the story about how she would bring a book along with her as she went up the elevator with her child. I assume you brought snacks for the child? Oh, okay, so she was all right. And if you got stopped for a long time, she had a diaper, right? So the Newhouse Hotel was demolished on August 26th. Well, let's look at it first here real quick. Where's my pointer? So there's the Hotel Newhouse as it looked in its prime and without the big sign on top of it. And then in 1983, as I said, the Hotel Newhouse came down, and it wasn't Sunstone's fault, but they were, according to history, the last ones out of the building. It was like, and it was kind of sad because it was a beautiful place, and a lot of beautiful magazines got put out in that place. And of course, it's terrible to see any kind of historic building coming down, especially for a parking lot. So then we were homeless for a brief time until we went to Aeropress Square, though not this building, as Alan so helpfully pointed out to me. This is the Hotel Albert, which is, I think, the only remaining building left of the complex. It's not where Sunstone was housed, but it said Aeropress Square on it, so I figured I might as well put it up there. They were there for a very short time. I couldn't find anything in the histories about it. I couldn't find any pictures. So that was where Aeropress Square was located, right across the street from the from the Salt Palace. So Peggy, being one of the craftiest people around, begged the second floor off of, I think it was her grandfather, who owned the Bennett Glass and Paint Building. Am I right? Okay, awesome. It was on 3rd South. It's right across the street from where the Marriott is right now. So for the next 5.5 years, they occupied that space, right? Which apparently had beautiful lighting as it would come in during the summers. It probably baked them too. And it was where 23 issues of the magazine and almost the entire 3-year run of the Sunstone Review was produced. And it also served as a sort of social center for Mormon intellectuals who were looking for a place to hang out. I culled this from Connie Disney's article in the current Sunstone. She talks about meeting Peggy. She says, "She introduced me to members of the staff as we walked through the Sunstone offices. The large rooms took up only a portion of the 2nd floor of the otherwise unused building. My work area was especially spacious. I came to love that room and the light it provided by its north-facing windows. I often brought along my littlest two and put them to bed on the floor in their sleeping bags. They were thrilled each time their friend Mike Stack took them on adventures through the convoluted levels and hallways, exploring unknown nooks and crannies and painting themselves in different colors." I'm kidding, I added that part. I have wonderful memories of working in this friendly old edifice, warmed by the busyness and banter of people engaged in a vital common cause, and by any space heaters we could haul up the stairs. So in 1986, so this is where the Bennett Paint and Glass building was, very close to Aeropress Square. They probably just carried everything over. They didn't have computers back then, right? So they just, it would be easy. So, so when Albert and Dan took over, they were informed that the Bennett building was about to be demolished and that they needed to find new quarters. And I culled this from Gary's history. And so they moved Sunstone offices to the Carpenter building near the downtown, near the Union Depot on Rio Grande Street. Interesting side note, the Bennett Glass and Paint building is most definitely still standing. And this is what, like almost 20 years later? You were duped, Albert. So they moved to here, and Carol Quist, one of our most stalwart staffers since early 1993, she described these offices in the Carpenter building as standing between official and unofficial homeless shelters. Apparently that's where the Sunstone staff was kept. Building restrooms were locked, so transients used the backyard. The yellow roses bloomed profusely, and they also used the elevator. They washed in the drinking fountains along with the staff members. I'm kidding. We pay our people a little bit. They came in the back door, hid in the basement, and slipped from the side door. Sunstone's first office was in the basement, and then they moved up in the world and got onto the 2nd floor. Okay, so that is where the Carpenter building was. So you can see that we made a steady move everywhere. There's Pioneer Park, so they'd always be going to the Twilight concert series, and Albert would be like, yeah, I'm paying for a concert for you guys, man, come on, let's go. So so then, in 1993, which is when I graduated from high school, we moved to this lovely building, which but I shouldn't show you that. I should show you the other one. We moved to this lovely building. This is what it looked like when we first moved in. It wasn't bad looking, but as you can see, we were righteous and we prospered in the land. And our landlord was excellent and brought in some first-rate landscapers. So let's see. And this is by far the office that we've been at the longest. We've been here for 18 years now, which is 2 years older than my son. So if you go into the Sunstone office, this is the first thing you see. You see a pictorial history of all of the magazines that we've ever put out. It kind of blew me away the first time I went through and saw that. And it's not just that wall. Let me show you the other stuff. Oh, there's our sun wall. That's where our office assistant lives, watched over by the sons. So that's, it keeps going. And then it goes into the next room, and then it goes down those shelves, and then it goes down those racks, and then it goes into the bookshelves that are out of the picture frame there. And that is Mary Ellen drinking her problems away while she's getting the symposium together. There is what was the editor's office when Dan was there. Did you live there, Albert? Yeah? Okay, that's where Albert lived too. And there's the bathroom. This is what you get to look at when you're going to the bathroom. And it's great. There are all these magazine covers that Albert made for the people who came through, and they're hilarious to look through. I wish I could remember what they said. Like the one for Peggy says, "From heretic to housewife." And that's how you go up the stairs. Our history goes up the stairs there. We have a lot of artifacts with the calendar at the top. I'm beginning with that. And this is our tape room. And it's where we have a whole bunch of audio tape that nobody's ever going to listen to, but they whisper to us at night. And this is how you get down into the dungeon, where we keep most of our volunteers. This is what it looks like down there. Yeah, we cleaned it up, you noticed. Thanks. that was a lot of work. I think we're to the end of the office. Yep, we are at the end of the office. Okay, so that's where we currently live. It's a fabulous place. I just love it there. So now let's look at some of the things that we've made. The first fundraiser that we had was for was calendars. It was an idea that a bunch of them came up with in 1974, and they went through and printed up all the calendars. And this is actually the time when we gathered together some of our biggest powerhouses. For example, Alan tells a story in his article in this issue of Sunstone that he first met Peggy when she came in to gather some of the photos that would go in the Mormon history calendar, and it was there that she first persuaded him of how awesome the Sunstone was, and he signed on and regretted it ever since. So I don't have this, I couldn't find any of the 1974 or 1975, but here's the 1976. It was beautiful. It's big and long, and it kind of dominates the room. It was quite a piece of work. And then we had 1977, which had even more awesome stuff. It was more of a normal size calendar. I really like this picture. It's a bunch of Native Americans on their horses outside of a future ZCMI building, and the caption says the inducement to which prompted the Indians to have themselves photographed in front is unknown. It's like, great sale, guys. I don't know what's going on. And then we had this beautiful 1979 Mormon history calendar that was printed on this sort of tan corrugated paper, which gave it a really nice feel. And this was the amazing one. I thought like Deseret Book had printed this because it was just designed out the wazoo, and it was in color, and it was gorgeous. Turns out Sunstone did it. And it was a week-by-week calendar, and it had pictures and trivia on every page, like this picture of David O. McKay with his 2 favorite horses, I guess. It was amazing. And then our final history calendar was the 1981 history calendar with these highly scrubbed pioneers on them. I think that's everybody. So when the first symposium happened, that is what the program looked like. It looked like a sacrament meeting program. And you can see on the back there, those are Alan Roberts' notes. He was the guy who gave the introduction. And there are a few things he says about there, like keep addresses within time limit, which apparently somebody didn't hear and went over 40 minutes. But everything else seemed to work out all right. And so the next year, after an insanely successful symposium, we had the 1980 Theological Symposium, which was the same style. The 1981 Theological Symposium, which was the same style. And then we headed into what I consider the golden age of symposium programs. We started to get color programs with a color cover. That was 1982. That's 1983. It's got a fish with a sun for an eye. I asked Peggy what the symbolism was, and she couldn't remember. So you can make it up. I don't know. Gorgeous, though. And then the 1984, the 1985, which was our psychic Sunstone Symposium, and 1986. Weren't these beautiful? It's just amazing what they put together. And then that one, 1988, was the last of sort of the color symposium programs. And we headed into what we've had ever since, which is the newsprint 8.5 by 11, though it's 8 by 10 now. But as you can see, we still had a lot of style because we had a woodcut by Brad Tare, who had done a lot of work for us and is quite an amazing artist. And we've stuck with that ever since. I want to show you all the crazy stuff. So we're always thinking about fundraising. And one of the ways we did it was with Christmas cards, Sunstone Christmas cards. And you know what? I was looking through the basement, and we still have a few stacks of these things. So if you guys are looking for a fun way to celebrate Christmas and make your friends wonder what's wrong with you, send them this. Baby Jesus loves Sunstone. And then this one, oh, that last one was Cal Grondal, and then this one's Mark Pete. Yeah, we should put out a luminous magazine one of these days so people put it at the top. And then the one by Pat Bagley. And on the inside of that, what did it say? The inside of that says, "The gospel sleigh is pulled by all kinds of reindeer." I really like that one. And then, of course, we had the insanely successful Freeway to Perfection by Cal Grondal. And Alan tells the story of showing this to Marion D. Hanks when he was a 70, and he laughed. And then he said, "You know, many of the other brethren probably wouldn't think this as funny as I do." So they tried to, well, first Deseret Book called them and said, "Gee, can we carry Freeway to Perfection?" They're like, "Sure." And then they called back like 2 days later and said, "Our editorial board kind of thinks this is kind of maybe too offensive, so," and they're like, pfft. And then 2 weeks later they called back and said, "Can we have that?" And they carried it anyway because, you know, mammon. And it sold like 10,000 copies. Am I right about that? Where did you go, Alan? I keep looking over here and I don't... That was right, 10,000 copies, like insanely successful. And just to let you know, there is a hidden scavenger hunt in your program that you can do if you have a cell phone with a QR reader, and you can get one of these if you finish it. So then we also produced Sunday's Foyer, which was more of Calvin Ronald. It's kind of hard to see, but there's like this deacon, and there's this wave of crying children out in the foyer, and the chapel is completely empty. Then there's faith-promoting rumors. This one actually got 2 covers. One was yellow and one was orange. And then we had Sunstone Stationery. I don't know if you knew this, but, and it had Cal Grondel's cartoons on it. This one says, "I'm one of the 3 Nephites and I need your car." Should have at least offered to trade food storage for it. But one of the things that we worried about was that one too many Dear John letters were written on this, but maybe it, softened the blow. Like, oh! All right. And, oh, look at this. This was Sunstone's one instance of software. And it's gorgeous. Look how beautifully that's designed. I just like to look at that thing. It had 93 issues of the symposium, or of the magazine in it, and the entire run of the Sunstone Review. And so if any of you still have a computer that can run on 512K of RAM, then you can grab one of these. And this is one of my favorite things. This is a... I just found it in the stacks. It was an original. It's an actual pencil. So we still have a few original Cal Grondels in there. Not sure who this Elder Packard guy is, though. Okay. Dang it, this is one. So a couple of issues ago, I put out an issue that had sort of an angel on the front cover with a sun behind her, and she was holding a sun. And there was this like yellow and red sunstone masthead above her, and which Mary Ellen lovingly calls the disco issue. And everybody's like, "Why did you put that? Why did you change it?" And I'm like, "Dude, have you no sense of history? That was the first masthead. It's totally disco." I really loved the first masthead. I really think they should have kept it for just a little longer. So I was trying to show my love to old Sunstone stuff, and I got that up. So that was our first masthead. It lasted for 1 issue. And then they took a card from Yes, and they made that masthead, which I really like too. It's got kind of an ebullience to it, sort of a psychedelic feel to it. And this is actually the rarest issue of Sunstone. It was edited by Orson Scott Card, and it has some really interesting stuff in there by Lavina Fielding Anderson as well. But this was supposed to be about the single Mormon man. So that's a hand that's putting a ring inside of a rat cage. Apparently there's some things that just haven't changed.
That's the first one that went to large size, magazine size.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, this was the first magazine style one too. And then we went to this sort of stately serifed masthead, and it didn't last long. How long did this one last? It lasted a little longer. 1983 to 1984, so it lasted for about a year, whereas the Yes one lasted from 1976 to 1982. So the fourth one, a nice bold font that looked really good. Let's see, I don't remember if this one shows up or not. Oh, it does. It looked really good tilted, and they used that a lot. And they used the bottom as the subhead. But I really liked that one. That one was cool. And then, drum roll please, we come up to the one that lasted for freaking ever. The fourth longest lived was designed by the immortal Connie Disney. who had been Sunstone's paste-up artist for a few years, and she used the Berkeley font. Well, yeah, the interior was Berkeley book. I don't know, was the masthead in Berkeley book as well, or was it just Berkeley? It was just Berkeley? Okay. So, let's see. So this is what she wrote about it. She said, "We liked how it mixed tradition with a modern forward look. It's lowercase e, which sadly you can't see there. With its sloped crossbar, it's especially unique. I was also taken with the font's history. It was designed for the University of California Press at UC Berkeley, a respected institution of higher learning with a reputation for pushing boundaries." That doesn't sound like us. The element, she said, made the masthead come together, though, was the tilted O, which you can see up there. Was that how much you tilted it, Connie? Yeah? Because I had these, but for... Oh, wait. I think this does...
I notice it's leaning slightly left.
It is. That was the decision that she made that she felt made it all come together as kind of a unique look. And I agree with her. The funny thing, let's see if this works. Oh, it worked. So, oh yeah, those are both the same. But Elbert, if he is, liked to play with it. So every issue, there was a new tilt to the O. I was going to make a little GIF of making it go boing, 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 but I didn't have to. So that particular masthead and issue style, layout style, lasted for an absolutely unprecedented 26 years until 2013, when Chris Briggs designed the new look for the magazine. So that's a basic tour of sort of the artifacts that Sunstone has produced throughout its history. There's also, of course, the Sunstone Review, and I have put together a little display table over here for afterward that has all of the things that I've shown you here in real life, and sometimes they're the very things that we photographed. And I also have 2 volumes of the Sunstone Review, so you can go through and see all the stuff that happened in there. There was a lot of good stuff. Like there was a brief debate about who the first Mormon playmate was. So as we continue as Sunstone, we continue to make cool little things in the attempt to raise money. And one of those is the Goddess collection. We have a cafe press store where you can get this beautiful illustration, which is on the cover of our Motherhood issue, which we put out about 2 years ago. Did you know that this is the only time that Google could ever find in the history of the universe where the Sistine Chapel ceiling was filled filled all the rows with women? I couldn't find a single other instance of it. This is the only time it's been thought of and put on the interwebs. Pretty cool, huh? Still breaking ground.
That was my idea.
It was fantastic too. Yeah, I didn't realize you were here, Holly, but Holly totally put together this issue, and it's gorgeous. It's like the most beautiful magazine that got put out while I was watching it. So you can get these as note cards, as mugs. Heck, you can get it as a shower curtain, if that's your thing. But we also have we also have all of our little stuff in our Mother series, the Mother Creator, the Mother Nurturer. This is where we try to envision how Heavenly Mother could get into the culture, how we could conceive of her, Mother Protector and the Mother Teacher. So if you feel like giving Sunstone in money in any other way than throwing it at us, and we love it, we'll like catch it in our shirts and stuff. Go and buy some stuff. It was insanely fun to go through Sunstone's history and see all of this stuff. It's kind of a history of passion. It's a history of seeing what it's like when people aren't following the trail, but making something new and brilliant that keeps on shining even after the issue has passed. I mean, going through the Sunstone issues, it's just beautiful. You go in and see it, and you see love is what you see. And it's a love that we continue to give Sunstone because it's Sunstone, right? Well, what other reason do you need? Thanks, guys. I appreciate you watching.
Well, you're right. Sunstone has a history of passion. I wasn't in the Big Bang Genesis moment when it was first conceived. That story belongs to Scott and Peggy, but I was there close to the beginning. In fact, the volume you showed with the stained glass window, volume 1, number 1, that's my brief article on Mormon stained glass. The first magazine issue, by the way, to give you a correction, was not the one you showed. It was the unsuccessful Kevin Barnhurst Messenger and Advocate issue, 1977, a 34-page blockbuster that led to the magazine size, and some of the early issues were the ones with my piece on Mormon symbolism, the Heber J. Grant photograph, and there's a portrait of Jesus. Those are some of the very earliest 77, 78 magazine formats. I was asked, as the others have been asked, to talk about the past, and some others were asked too, who declined. Scott, Peggy, Albert, others didn't really want to talk about the past. And I'm only going to mention it briefly because actually what I like to talk about is the future of Sunstone, where it can go, what can it be at its highest and best, most aspirational state, what good can it do for the members and for the church at large. I'd like to talk about that. But the early years were very exciting. Everything to us was new and done for the first time. And we didn't have a plan. We were really a disparate group of people. Many of us had not known each other previously. It was the first magazine, the first review, the first cartoon book, the first calendar, the first symposium. I was very happy to be involved in those early efforts. And Stephen, I had no regrets then, and I have no regrets now. I feel very proud to have been associated with Sunstone and all of you who were part of it. But part of the issue, maybe the problem of Sunstone, is you people and me. If you look at the average age of the people in this room, it's somewhere north of 60. And I think the idea of reinvigorating Sunstone and refreshing it is a great idea. In fact, I would suggest that we have at Sunstone, I keep saying we, like I'm still involved, it was 40 years ago, that Sunstone maybe create a select panel and do some reflection, some re-examination. Take a look at Sunstone's role in the community and its identity, and whether it can go to a higher place. I think of, well, let me back up and say, I think it's true that representatives of the church hierarchy are aware of Sunstone and they read it, attend the symposium, probably report back. They won't acknowledge it, I'm sure, but I think they are aware of it, maybe even in detail. And if that's true, then the more worthy it is of reading, and the more it's read, the more influential it can be. I think of the example of the Catholic publication Commonweal. It's been around for 90 years now, not 40, and it's been very influential in the evolution of the Catholic Church. Again, the hierarchy probably won't acknowledge it, but they have documented how various key articles and activities going back over those 90 years have led, at least in part, to things like the very important Vatican II changes. So let me read something about Commonweal. This is a quote from their website. Commonweal takes on tough issues and finds unexpected answers with which the mainstream media and the official church are not entirely comfortable. Commonweal, in short, tells the truth about our nation, our culture, our media, and our politics. And it continues, it's our job to be a civilized, welcoming forum where reasoned debate and argument about the future of our Catholic tradition can take place free from outside interference or agenda. So I think you could replace the word Catholic with Mormon tradition. I think Sunstone already does much of this, and I think it could be even stronger in how it does it and what it does. A couple of just brief suggestions, and then I'll sit down and be eager to hear what the others have to say. I think it'd be useful to do a survey of the other independent Mormon periodicals and find out who's doing what, and attempt to be unique and not redundant, and do things the other publications are not doing, fill those empty gaps. I think more special issues would be a great idea. I think these have a high impact, and we've done some on history, theology, social issues, and so forth. I think there are other special issues that could be done. I'd like to see Sunstone get great writing from great writers from within and without the Mormon community. We have done some of that. I think we could do even more of that. Maybe even investigative reporting. I'd like to see more editorials and more letters, more commentary. I think that it's a great idea to commission articles rather than just select from those that happen to come in the door unsolicited. There was a time when we actually did that. Peggy was particularly good at that. She knew how to influence people to write pieces that they were thinking about, or maybe they had sort of written a long time ago, and she was able to generate a lot of pieces. And I too was interested in essentially commissioning people to write things on important topics. More focused. I think sometimes Sunstone is the reflection or the product of the whims of the current editors and editorial staff, and it's very eclectic. I mean, Dialogue, on the other hand, has had the same formula from 1965 to now. It hasn't really changed much. Sunstone has gone through all kinds of metamorphoses and phase changes, and I think that's also good. And I like the last 4 issues, by the way. I think there are a lot of strong improvements in those. So focusing, we can't be everything to everybody. I think we should decide really what's important, what we can do that's essential, and do those things very well. So just a couple of thoughts about Sunstone in the future. I'm very optimistic, maybe pathologically optimistic, about Sunstone and its role, its importance, its influence, the good that it does. I'm glad to see you here. I wish this, every success to the symposium. Thank you all.
I understood the assignment slightly differently than I think what it ended up being. I got the impression I was just to tell one story that sort of captured something quintessential about Sunstone and the Sunstone type of things. And I think I've picked one that it really does cover lots of different things, but rather than do a broad reflection, I'm going to have a deeper dive on one particular thing. And that is the production of the, from start to finish, of the lead article in this particular issue, the November 2005 Sunstone, called God Wrestling, Physicality, Conflict, Redemption in Mormon Doctrine by Rick Jepson. The story begins with just a phone call, and often when people call you at Sunstone, they want to be in the magazine, or they want to do something at the symposium, and it's not usually that fun because what percentage are good ideas? But this was a wonderful one. He called in the spring of 2005, and it was just as we were getting ready to put the symposium together, and whatever he said to me in that first 5 minutes really seemed like a wonderful thing. He hadn't completely filled it out. He hadn't written the whole article and stuff. So, you know, you really ought to come to the Sunstone Symposium and, you know, present on it and see what the audience can help. You know, you'll get a reaction for it, and you'll kind of know where to go after that. And so one of the things that that I love, that this is a quintessential Sunstone thing, is Rick Jepson at the time was a nursing student at UVU. He had never published anything, but he had been a high school wrestler and I think he had done some college wrestling, but he continued to compete in wrestling tournaments in different styles all around the state and the region and things like this. So he was a very passionate wrestler, and he certainly was a studious person and things like this, but he had never done anything like this. In fact, when I talked to him a little bit about getting some of the details right for this, he said, you know, I was married, I had a couple of kids, I was a nursing student, I was feeling like a failure in some ways, like I didn't really have accomplished anything in my life. And he was, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, he was certainly complimenting me and the role that this played in doing something for him. But, you know, Sunstone is a place where it's not just scholars. It's just not the degreed persons. It's people with passion, people willing to pay the price to do the work. And that was absolutely the case with Rick. He was ready to roll. And let me tell you why this one has been such an important it's on my screen, right? But how come it didn't change on that? Yeah, if you want to see what happens there. No, well, here, see, it's showing up on the screen just fine. Anyway, no big deal. So Rick came to the symposium with this idea, and what the article is about, it's about Jacob's wrestle with Esau. Oh, by the way, that cover was not a super interesting story, but Alan Hill was the designer at the time, and he just searched. He didn't want any of the regular ones. Had anybody ever seen Jacob in the wrestle depicted like that? He found that in some German museum, and we ended up having to pay them. I think it turned out to be about $90 to be able to use that image to get permission for it, but it was a fun one. And Alan did lots of very interesting layout things with this. But Rick's idea as a wrestler, and you know, looking at the Jacob and Esau story and looking at, you know, wrestling in its own role in his life, and of course with Joseph Smith, and apparently the Prophet Muhammad was well known as a wrestler and things like this, was this idea that through physical struggle, through pitting yourself, through, you know, all-out warfare with another, there's a spiritual component to that, and that was the basic idea. So the thing that was so interesting at the symposium, he probably did 15, 20 minutes worth of presentation, and I was sitting in the audience because I was nurturing this young presenter along, and then he did the most amazing thing. He called his brother up from the front row, and the two of them wrestled at the front of the Hilton Hotel, you know, or the Sheraton Hotel down there, and it was hard. I mean, they went at it the way only brothers, who are both big guys, can do. And it was so powerful. I just started to bawl. Sitting there at an academic, you know, quasi-academic symposium, and to see these guys go at it certainly reminded me of my brother and I with our struggles and things like he had given us enough of Jacob and Esau to kind of get a feel for that. But then he gifted me with the metaphor that you know, if you've listened to me on my podcast, or it probably came up in various things that I've done through the years. How do I reopen it? Oh, it's so weird here because I'm not gonna. I need to be able to see it here to move to the right page. But I'll just talk it through, and if you can. No, I want to be within the piece. So. Yeah. I'm not going to depend on the technology. At some point, I believe that he and his brother had agreed that now they would slow down a little bit, and then Rick was able to demonstrate a position. And what he did is he had both of his arms around his brother. If you can get to it, it's about 5 or 6 pages in. One more, probably. Yeah, there it is. Okay, this isn't his brother. We had the match at Sunstone. His brother was in the Army, so it just happened to be home for that time. But this is Rick here. and one of his workout partners or something like that came up to the top floor of the Sunstone offices, and our intern Chelsea Bush snapped the picture of it and stuff like this. But look at this metaphor here. He says, as I face an opponent, one of the strongest positions I can obtain is wrapping both arms around his torso and hugging him in tightly. Then I can bump him, trip him, or throw him, but will remain in that embrace. And regardless of whom or what I may be fighting, I can also choose this same approach. One of the most powerful things in my life, and he goes on in the article to talk about a stance that he takes with almost everything. It's a stance that you can not only take when you wrestle with God and when you yell and you do all those different things. It's a stance you can take with the church, that even as you criticize, even as you have problems with it, you can remain in that close embrace. And it was just this wonderful gift, and it happened right there. I made sure that we were able to capture it here. While we're here, and I don't know, Stephen kind of went through it really fast, one of the things I do love about Sunstone is that it is a magazine. And rather than a journal, I mean, you can do sidebars and things in journals, but the magazine with the visual elements, the chance that you can kind of take a section and set it aside. So we have well, let me keep telling you the story. So at the Sunstone Symposium that Rick did it, he also had a wonderful response. This is another one of the beautiful things about Sunstone. The audience came up and said, hey, here's an idea that occurred to me when you did it. And one of the things was Rick had never really looked at the sort of the exegesis that talks about Jacob and the angel as sort of a covenantal, with the ritual stuff, kind of a sealing of your calling and election to make sure with the name change and stuff that kind of happens to that. So that was a piece that was contributed to. He hadn't really thought of Joseph Smith receiving the first vision and the physicality of that wrestle with the evil forces or whatnot and things like this. So again, this one also demonstrates a bit about the Sunstone Symposium and that chance to sort of workshop things and the Sunstone Symposium's role as a feeder for the magazine. So Rick took all that stuff, worked super hard for the next few months, created, to me, one of my favorite pieces, and I want to share just a couple of lines from it that just are so powerful. As he was coming to a close in the writing process, this is what we ended up putting in as a footnote for one of his pieces, and it's a footnote to the section where we did a little sidebar just on Jacob and Esau. He goes, after a year of obsession over this whole story, I finally realized just the week before going to press that it's Isaac's favoritism of Esau over Jacob that had resonated so strongly with me all along. My own mild father, the youngest, smallest, and meekest of two sets of twin boys, seemed always frustrated with me, with my boyhood shyness and sensitivity, but not with my brother Michael, who came 3 years later. I've become a strong man, but like my father, I also had to develop that strength by winning and losing matches. Mike was just born strong and wild. Dad loved his spunky son, and the son who fought back, who even as a toddler threatened to beat your brains to the moon. Mike still says and does what he wants, while I remain censured by the fear of disappointing our parents. And though I've adopted my father's two great loves, wrestling and writing, I've never caught his eye with either. But Dad swells with wet-eyed pride over his younger, feistier son who was out driving Hummers in Iraq, while I sit here guzzling soda at the keyboard. Jacob's many grapples have become personally revealing to me. My brother and I still wrestle each time we see each other, and it's the same hugging while clinching that I see in Jacob and Esau. Yet I've become even more touched by the struggle I imagine Jacob had in trying to earn his father's esteem. He couldn't buy it or steal it, despite his efforts. But I hope he ultimately gained it. Decades after the reunion, Jacob and Esau met again to bury their father. I like to imagine that by then, all three men had come to terms with themselves and with each other. A magazine like Sunstone, full of very good scholarship in this piece, to always be able to make room for the personal voice and the intimacy of it. I've got to read to you my very favorite closing paragraph of anything that I ever published as the editor here. Again, this is after this large, wonderful reflection on the physicality of struggle and just the redemptive spiritual qualities or something like this. And he's reflecting at the end. And you'll love the last line, I hope. Wrestling is like any other human activity. We can endow it with meaning and use it to reflect on the divine. Others have touched God by harvesting yams or fixing boats. I've done it by approaching the veil, being with my wife, reading to my kids, climbing on mountains, and on a few occasions by bearing down on an opponent and choking him until his face turns purple. Nice thing that happened. After this came out, one of Rick's professors at UVU is a Sunstone subscriber. It caught his eye. He said, "Rick, let's write something together." So Rick got his first, professional journal publication that ended up winning awards. He went on to become a nurse who also published in nursing journals about diagnostic things that nurses cannot often see and spot more than doctors can. Rick went on to become the head of dialysis at the regional center down in Provo Medical Center. He's now in Boise, Idaho, working as a representative for a company that offers dialysis services everywhere. But he just talks about, he says, this cover is framed above my study today as the moment that he gained confidence. And I think that's the kind of thing that really says a lot about what Sunstone's all about. So I'll share that. Thank you.
I want to talk just for a moment, apropos of nothing maybe, I just want to talk about Saltaire. We're in the Saltaire room, there's this beautiful picture of Saltaire, and I realized when I saw it that I know about Saltaire, right? It was started in about 1893, it was jointly owned by the LDS Church and a railroad company. They built a short line railroad from Salt Lake so people could get out to Saltaire, and they did this because the church was terrified that these seedy, terrible resorts were going to spring up around the Great Salt Lake. Coney Island was called Sodom by the Sea. It was this horrible place. Well, it was perceived as this horrible place because in about the 1830s, 1840s, rich New Yorkers realized they could go to Coney Island and bathe in the water and have a nice afternoon. But you have to be wealthy to do that. You need, it takes time. You can't have a job. And then as time goes on, transportation costs start to drop. Railroads become more and more ubiquitous. And now, middle class and even occasionally poor people can go to Coney Island. And from the perspective of these wealthy people, Coney Island is a disaster. So the church decides to build Saltaire, but it instantly is also really problematic, and the church is attacked. It becomes this delicious way of attacking the church for the non-Mormon people in Salt Lake City. And they do so because Saltaire sells alcohol, and the church sells alcohol there, and they sell it on Sunday too. And the Ministerial Association in Salt Lake is outraged. And it goes back and forth, and there are great, diary entries around this in the late 1890s among LDS general authorities who are fighting with each other. Joseph F. Smith hates Saltaire. He is not okay with Saltaire, and George Buchanan is mad at him. And he's like, we built this for a good reason. You got to get on board with this. And then at one point, the rumors keep flying about what's going on at Saltaire, and there's rumors that a kid got drunk. And then at one point, there is a rumor that the church operates a brothel out at Saltaire. Anton Lund, in his diary, is so outraged. He is recording this incident, and he gets to the part where he has to tell them about, where he's going to talk about the fact that the church, is rumored to run a brothel, and he is so upset and incensed and outraged that he records it in Danish. He can't handle writing it in English, so he writes this in Danish. And I tell that story because I know something about Saltaire because of Sunstone. I got involved in Sunstone, and it gives a safe space for people who are going through a lot in their life when they realize that maybe things they thought about Mormonism are not exactly what Mormonism might be. And that was me. That was my personal experience. And by coming along and discovering something like Sunstone and creating a place where I can explore this LDS history that I still have a fascination with today, and that I still spend, all my time, most of my time doing. That really comes from Sunstone. And if it really hadn't been because of that, you all probably would have met me on the lunch break. I would have been wearing a paper hat, serving you your dinner, and that would have been me. But thanks to Sunstone, I have much more going for me. So I want to talk about the 4 years that I was at the 3 years that I was at Sunstone, and the issues that we did. Because for me, maybe not for everybody, but for me, it's really tempting to think the internet's kind of always been there, and these blogs and Facebook, and just kind of the way we do these things, it's always been like that. And of course, that's not true. For a long time, for a lot of people, Sunstone was was their outlet. If it was December and you were sitting in church and the bishop just read some crazy letter from the first presidency that made you mad, or you wanted to go talk to people about, your option was Sunstone. You had to wait for the symposium, or you at least had to wait for the magazine, so that you could feel like you had this connection to other people, because you might have been the only one in your ward, or maybe there was like one other guy and you could whisper in the corner, but that was it. And so Sunstone created this place where people could do that. And the blogs are great, and it's wonderful that they're there. And now, something happens and people are on Facebook instantly complaining about it or talking about it. And there's value in that. But there's also value in what Sunstone has done and continues to do, and that's long-form reporting and writing. A blog post short, and now we've got, Facebook, and there's, you may know there's an abbreviation, TLDR, right, for the internet. Too long, didn't read. So people will see something too long and they'll post that saying, can't even be bothered. And Sunstone, I think, continues to fill an important space for that, and I hope everyone, subscribes to it and continues to support it that way. The first issue of Sunstone when I got there was featured a cover on Perfect Place to Start, Mormons and the Internet, and this was in 2002, and it was done by Hugo Olays, and we should have put the name Nostradamus in between Hugo and Olays, because he predicted beautifully the challenges of Mormonism on the Internet. And at the time, he was reporting this breaking thing where the church thought it was going to control what happened on the Internet, that they banned a really popular LDS list server at BYU, and so they were going to stop things by not allowing access at BYU, and that did not work out great. Hugo goes through in this issue the challenges of open spaces that the church cannot regulate, and it's just perfect for what's going on today and what we see happening today with the internet and with people meeting each other. If you were the only one in your ward, now you have these groups online where you can go and talk about all of this stuff. One of the issues we did right after that was perhaps my favorite. Dan and I got a tape recorder, and we got a group of, Dan put this together. We got a group of African-American Latter-day Saints, and we went to somebody's home in Salt Lake City, and they all sat around, and they just had this intense, freewheeling discussion about what it was like, in 2002, be a black Mormon. And there were, rough stories and difficult stories, and they didn't always agree. And one woman said, I'm an African American Mormon, and another one got mad and was like, whatever, I am a black woman and I am proud of it, and they clashed over these basic things, and a lot of that ended up in the magazine, and I thought that was really good. And what I've observed is that and I'll go through a couple more of these quickly, but these issues that Sunstone has been dealing with, and when I was, the thing I hated most when I was the symposium coordinator, as a quick aside, is that the program would come out, and inevitably people would say, oh, it's the same old issues, breaking news, sometimes Mormonism isn't nice to women, how many times do we have to hear this? And that drove me crazy, because Sunstone was the place to talk about this, and you would have people come through, and they would go through that, and then they would go on their way, and a lot of them would make peace with Mormonism and go on, and some of them would leave and go on. But Sunstone was there for that conversation, and it was the only place to have that conversation. And now you see that 10 years later, these issues that we dealt with at Sunstone and that the articles that showed up in Sunstone are showing up somewhere else. They're showing up at lds.org/topics. And all of these things that Sunstone was willing to tackle, now the church is having to deal with. And the people that have been involved with Sunstone have been dealing with these for years. And so Sunstone does this issue on blacks and the priesthood, and then last year the church posts the statement online, really, as far as I am aware, the first time that they acknowledged that this was folklore and this was not true, and we repudiate it. We did an issue on the Book of Mormon and limited geography challenges and DNA. There's an essay on that online. We did an issue on apologetics that was very good by John Charles Duffy. And it talks about, it talked a little bit, about the different kinds of apologetics, but especially about kind of the rabid approach of groups like Farms down at BYU. Farms is now gone. And the Maxwell Institute at BYU takes a very different approach. And now you see the rise of what they say is the inoculation, way of handling this stuff. We're going to approach it head on, and we're going to deal with it that way. And so, again, these essays come online. And another one that we did was early return missionaries at the time. Well, there was like an article and people talking about this just a couple of months ago, because you see this big spike in the number of missionaries going out, and a lot of them are returning early. And how do you deal with that? The church lowered the age, and now you have 18-year-olds and younger people going on missions. And it's, of course, it's very taxing. When the missionaries come to my door, I'm like the nicest guy on the planet. Maybe not as much if the bishop comes, but if the missionaries come to my door, I will be so nice, because it is just, I did it, and it is extremely challenging. And Sunstone addressed all of those issues, but there's more to be done. Sunstone in 2004 did 2 issues on women's issues. There was one by Margaret Toscano. The cover story was by Margaret Toscano on Mother in Heaven and the roles of women in the church. And then another was actually on what it means to grow up as a Mormon woman, and how do you define your sexuality that way. That was another Sunstone issue, and that was in 2004. And then 10 years later, the LDS Church excommunicated Kate Kelly. And so I think that that's one thing, unfortunately, that Sunstone has not been able to be quite the roadmap for that it was with things like DNA in the Book of Mormon and apologetics and other issues. And so I hope that Sunstone, and I'm glad that Sunstone is still around to talk about these things and continue to push this kind of conversation forward. Thank you.
I decided I'd call my brief comments outtakes and parties. The outtakes are the things that some of the stuff Stephen cut out of what I sent in when he asked me to write some of my memories about Sunstone last month. And it was a very interesting experience for me, because I thought, I think I kept some diaries back then. Let's go look in those journals. And I found that I had a sense that we were in the middle of some pretty crazy times. And I was keeping some pretty detailed diary accounts what was going on. And the thing that I found that really struck me and sort of captured my sense of a lot of stuff that was going on while I was at Sunstone were things that I wrote in 1981. And what happened in 1981 is we started the Sunstone Review, which was just an insane thing. And I want to kind of read you from some of my diary about that, because we were convinced we had solved all the problems of Sunstone forever after. Money, people, fame. And it was also the same time that all the stuff was heating up around Mormon history, and that Brother Packard gave his talk, and Mike gave his talk down at BYU, and Peggy and I had gone down there, and I wrote about that, like that night when we came home. So it was this intense mixture of just excitement and you know, misery over some of the things that were happening. And Stephen sort of left some of the misery and what he published in the Sunstone, so I thought one thing I'd read, and then I will get to the party part. I just wanted to read this diary entry I wrote about the review, because a lot of you probably don't know much about the review, and it was just such an exciting idea, and it got us excited about a lot of things, brought in new people. We bought a typesetter. It was a very old typesetter. It didn't have any memory, but at least we could typeset our own stuff. And it got us in the middle of a lot of trouble with the church, because we were doing a lot more reporting on news. And but I just want to read this, because it's like looking at my young self and going, oh, you poor thing. Beginning in June, we launched a new publication called the Sunstone Review. Potentially, it could really get us out of our financial bind. But we really haven't gone to that point yet. It is sort of a cross between the New York Times book review, we always had grand, Peggy always could think big, and a news magazine. At least that's how we see it potentially. It is a publication printed on newsprint, at the present time, the same size as the magazine, but with a different format. We are printing 40,000 copies at the present time and distributing it free through bookstores and institutes. With that kind of circulation, we are hoping to compete for real advertising dollars. Though I am also convinced that we can continue to increase the circulation of the magazine, even make the advertising more competitive. In fact, I think that we could realistically double the circulation of the magazine with a huge, effective Christmas mailing. With 10,000 subscribers, we would be getting to the point where people would have to start noticing the magazine also. The review has made life pretty hectic, especially since we brought the typesetting in-house, and of course that has meant our work has at least doubled or tripled, and we haven't really doubled or tripled editorial employees, but the possibilities are accelerating. I like the new insights and directions that the review is bringing to the whole organization. For one thing, we can see light at the end of the tunnel financially if we can just materialize the potential while we still have the edge competitively. That sounds really marketing, doesn't it? Otherwise, someone else will move into the market, but it's really helping us. We're taking ourselves more serious as a news organization. We realize more fully each day what a very superficial job we are doing in reporting the Mormon scene. Of course, our shorthandedness is going to handicap us for a while, but at least we are improving. But just reading more books and reading more books is helping us idea-wise. As we read more publications, more newspapers, more books, it helps us to break out of our parochial regional ghetto. In the long run, I really think it's going to help us survive in this crazy climate that is coming about in the church. I just read that and it just made me, you know, it brought back those years. And it was really exciting because what we actually managed to do as part of the Sunstone Review is bring in what, at least at some point I know we called young flesh, which partly came via, and actually Mike Stack, I have to tell you, was one of the people that came in as part of the young flesh as I remembered it, but the first group was hooking up with the people from the 70s press at BYU, and met Albert and Sissy Warner and Scott Dunn, who's been one of my great friends forever. And I even enlisted my sister out in Taylorsville to come in and be the secretary for the office. It was quite an amazing conglomeration of people. That was an exciting time. So I just wanted to include that part because I think that's, you know, the kind of thing you're talking about tonight. What do we do to find that new feeling in the future? And I think it's kind of cool to have had that in my life. The other thing that I actually wanted to sort of talk about a little bit is I got to thinking about a very brief experience I had. And what I just wanted to do was talk a little bit about Daniel Rector, who was the editor at Sunstone for a short period of time. And it was after I left Sunstone, but I ended up having a really interesting experience where I got to know Daniel a little bit. At that point, I was working for Signature Books, and there was a period of time where Daniel was kind of starting to work at Sunstone, and he was also doing book stuff for Signature. And it was at the point that we'd published Salamander, and we were selling books, and so we sent a big contingent of people to go to the American Booksellers Association. It was held in Los Angeles, and amazingly, it was held at Disneyland, which is kind of hard to remember why. We stayed in the Disneyland Hotel, and we got free tickets to go to Disneyland, and I remember there was for some reason, Jimmy Buffett was there, and we had a great night, and people were just remembering that I actually saw George Smith dance. But I ended up having to go down late, and Daniel and I ended up driving down together. And I think we had one of those encounters where only two strangers who know nothing about each other, will probably never talk to each other again, spend 15 hours in a car together. And we really hit it off and talked. And I just really came to love Daniel Rector. He, you saw what a, complicated kind of situation he was coming out of in the church. I mean, his father was a general authority. He had a hugely conventional family life, and he was trying to balance these things, and he had this kind of spark in him. And I was just, I love that. I love that crazy time we had in Los Angeles. And one thing, at that point I was running, and I found that Daniel was a crazy man in the outdoors. And we spent a whole bunch of time running when we were in Los Angeles. We would go down the beach every morning and run. And then when we came back, I actually went biking with him a couple of times and decided if I did that again, I would die. He was a crazy mountain biker, and obviously he was crazy in the wild. But one thing that we did do that was sort of I don't know if this has anything to do with anything other than just kind of the love and excitement of people in the group, is that we at one point started this great little hiking group that would go up into the mountains, and it was people from sort of Sunstone and Signature. Albert was part of this hiking group, and Connie was part of the hiking group, and Ron was part of it, and Bill Slaughter, and a bunch of people. And we'd hike up into the mountains and talk about life and talk about the church and talk about all of the things. And one of the greatest things we did, and this is we'd get up on the top of the mountain and we'd share poetry with each other. And one of my strongest memories, and I am going to do this, Albert, was on the top of the mountain, doing poetry. And Albert was the great declaimer of Gerald Manley Hopkins. And I always remember Albert on the mountain with God's grandeur. And I just think that's a great place to end my talk tonight. So I'm going to make Albert declaim to you God's grandeur. Because he wouldn't give a talk tonight.
God's Grandeur by Gerard Manley Hopkins. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crush. Why then do men now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The earth is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the west bank went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings.
Well, the time is getting late. I'm well aware of yawns and drooping eyelids, mine included, I think. It's been a long day. So I'll come back to this recognition in just a minute. The time is getting late. But first of all, I just wanted to note that it seems appropriate to me to be the outlier on this table and the last listed in the program for tonight's panel discussion. I am a bit of a party crasher here. Unlike my panel colleagues, my involvement with Sunstone has been very limited over the years. I've written a couple of small things, and I've always been a faithful subscriber and mostly a faithful attender, and I've made a few presentations and so on. And I can even vaguely recollect back in the early 80s with my brother Gordon, who's also my collaborator on much of what we do. Being in Salt Lake City, and I've almost forgotten, I have forgotten the reason for why we were seeking out Peggy Fletcher. And at that time, this was the Bennett Glass and Paint Building era. And we got directions how to get to that. And my recollection is not bright sunlit windows, but a gloomy, spooky, kind of dingy place. And my first recollection of Peggy was kind of like a hippie queen holding court on a big pillow in the middle of a large room with people seeking audiences. And so that's, my recollection in terms of memories of Sunstone Past is pretty foggy. I did want to at least start with a question that may seem a little bit out of place for the purposes of my being here tonight. And that question is, would Sunstone, the magazine, the symposium, and all of the other Sunstone products have come into being if Scott Kenny and Peggy Fletcher hadn't had those early brainstorming sessions in the early to mid 1970s, and then in the late 1970s, if Alan Roberts and Peggy hadn't come to the rescue when it looked like Sunstone was going to go down the tubes. And I think the answer to that is quite obviously yes. I think we would have had Sunstone. It might not have been called Sunstone, and it might have taken a different form, but I think something like Sunstone would have come about anyway, maybe a little bit later, obviously a little bit later, not too much, I don't think. And I think the same purposes would have been served, because I think that Sunstone represented then a need, not just an idea, but a need whose time had come. And of course, Peggy and Kenny and Alan and other of the earlier Sunstoners were really representatives of what I would take to be the first truly modern generation of LDS young people. And of course, they were also part of the 60s, the baby boomers, and questions regarding taken for granted assumptions based on claims of authority and established ways of doing things and so on were being massively questioned during that time. And so I think Sunstone, within the context of an LDS group of young people, was inevitable. And it needed to be addressed. And of course, although the young people were the ones who inaugurated Sunstone, it doesn't mean that they were the only ones who had the same need that they they felt and were experiencing. I think they were just more at home with the idea of maybe moving ahead and doing something about it. But the need was there, as I said. And so do I think that Sunstone has a positive contribution as an independent voice, sometimes a very critical voice, for the health and long-term well-being of the institution, the church? I support and endorse that idea very strongly. Now, as I said a minute ago, I realize time is getting late, and we may have some difficulty paying attention, especially to a long list of thoughts that I've thrown together here. These thoughts, by the way, aren't really new or revelatory in nature, so I'm not going to feel too badly in skipping a lot of this in the interest of time. And by the way, I also believe that the intention was to save at least a few minutes for some questions and comments, and something to snap us awake before we have to hit the road to get home and drive safe in doing it. So I'm going to cut out a lot of detailed stuff, and I'm going to go straight to, I think the main reason that I was asked to join this panel as an outsider, which was simply to comment on the positive potential for Sunstone as a prominent independent voice in the Mormon community to affect the well-being of the institutional church. And so the question is, can and has Sunstone in all of its various manifestations had an impact on the institutional church? And here I'm going to focus on the positive impact. When you talk about consequences and impacts, sociologists sometimes like to talk about functions and then make a distinction between positive functions and negative functions, or positive consequences and negative consequences, and that analysis often depends on one's perspective, on the point of view that one has. But in terms of change that I think most of us, at least in this room, would agree to as being positive, there are some obvious examples. Let me just ask you to help keep you awake here and get a little bit of participation going here. If you could identify one major institutional change that Sunstone has helped contribute to, not alone, and then other voices as well, dialogue and so on, but if you could identify one major institutional change that's been brought about by critical analysis and questioning, what would you offer as your example of that?
I guess what I perceive to be the opening up of the church archive under Marlon Jensen and others. It seems to me that I don't know whether there's a direct correlation, but it seems to me that the impetus for
well, I don't know all the ins and outs of that policy change, but I suspect, as you do apparently also, that there has been some influence coming from voices represented in Sunstone and other independent LDS groups. And that's certainly a benefit to scholars. And in the long run, when scholars have a chance to present objective, careful analysis of old traditions and myths, although that may be upsetting and so on, in the short run, in the long run, it does a service to the larger community. Anything else you can think of? And I'm thinking of something, and I believe that John alluded to this, and it should be on the tip of everybody's tongue.
Blacks in the priesthood.
Sure.
In fact, the church got our permission to use the Sunstone cover where we showed a black man ordaining a blonde boy. We had it on our cover, and they loved it so much the church actually used Sunstone's photo.
Okay, well, that's the obvious, I think, first piece of evidence that one could advance for the positive institutional impact of critical, alternative, independent voices within an institutional structure that is not a democracy, but that is nevertheless susceptible to public and member opinion and shifts in behaviors and attitudes. The church, even as an authoritarian organization, over time has to respond to those developments. And I think voices like Sunstone help to crystallize and move forward those transitions. Now, in the case of the ban on people of men of African descent holding the priesthood, that change, when it happened very quickly. A single revelation, and it was done. If we think of another area of institutional change that maybe isn't going to happen so quickly, it's in progress, as it were, a work in progress, and it's a much slower, almost glacial work in progress. What do you think that might be? I'm kind of almost a par with the priesthood issue with women. The status and role of women in the church. Now, I would suggest, and I'm sure on a moment's reflection you would all have to agree, that there has been some progress made here. Slowly, over time, the status of women in terms of their ability to get an education without being looked at as oddballs, to work outside of the home and not be condemned as negligent others. We've seen those changes occur. And there have been others like those changes. And even in small increments, changes in opportunities for leadership, or at least for participation in somewhat subsidiary roles that had nevertheless been denied to women. But of course, the big issue is full equality within the organization, and that means priesthood, and Elder rightly identified that right away. And this is, I'm not a prophet. So I can't say what the future holds. I can just say that this is a question for the future, although I must also say it's very difficult for me to imagine, at least, that in the long term, within the modern secular world that we inhabit, and the church has had to accommodate, it's accommodated many things over the arc of its history to secular demands, where every other organization and institution in this country have either already recognized the equality of women or are well on the path to doing so in terms of full access to positions of leadership and responsibility. It's very difficult to see the LDS Church holding out forever and denying its women what already is assumed to be the natural state of affairs. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I'm somewhat optimistic, although it's going to be a terrific challenge for the institutional church to accommodate this. I see for the long run that eventually it has to happen. And for further details on this question, let me just recommend that all of you who can attend a session on Saturday afternoon from, I think it's, help me out here, is it 3 to 5? I think, no, I'm sorry, it's at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock Saturday, there will be a very distinguished panel of women, a diverse panel of very accomplished women. Is it 5? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, so thank you for helping me out here. 5 o'clock, so you're going to be a little hungry. But this diverse panel of women will address these questions that I'm just alluding to right now. Thank you.